I still remember the exact moment their eyes changed, not because they suddenly loved me, and not because they finally understood me, but because of a number that echoed louder than my name ever had in that house. $5 million. That was the day I stopped being invisible in my own family. That was the day they looked at me as if I had always mattered. But the truth is, I had spent my entire life being the person no one noticed. My name is Grace. And if I had to describe my childhood in one word, it would be overlooked. I was not the child they were proud of, not the one they introduced with excitement, not the one they talked about with glowing eyes. That place was reserved for my older brother, Daniel. He was the golden child, the future of the family, the one who carried their dreams. I was simply the extra chair at the dining table, the quiet presence in family photos, the voice that was rarely asked for. When guests came over, my parents would call Daniel to the living room to show how smart he was, how talented he was, how bright his future looked. I would stand in the kitchen doorway holding a tray, waiting for someone to notice I was Sir. No more one ever did. If Sir was one slice of cake left, it went to Daniel. If Sir was praise to give, it went to Daniel. If Sir was attention, it flowed toward him like sunlight through a window. And me, I learned to live in the shade. I was not mistreated in an obvious way. They never shouted at me without reason. They never punished me unfairly. They simply forgot me. And sometimes, being forgotten hurts more than being scolded, because at least anger means you are seen. Indifference means you are not even worth the emotion. I learned to stop asking for things. I learned to stop expecting appreciation. I learned to keep my thoughts to myself because no one seemed interested in hearing them. Slowly, I became quiet, observant, and self-reliant. I taught myself that expecting nothing would protect me from disappointment. I convinced myself that I did not need anyone's approval. But deep inside, there was still a small part of me that wished someone would look at me the way they looked at Daniel. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, Evelyn. She had soft hands and sharp eyes. Whenever she visited, she would sit beside me instead of Daniel. She would ask me what I was reading, what I was thinking, what I wanted to become. She would listen, really listen, as if my words were important. And every time before she left, she would hold my face gently and say, "Grace, one day they will regret not seeing your worth." I used to smile when she said that. I thought she was just being kind, trying to comfort a quiet granddaughter who felt small in her own home. I never imagined she meant it as a warning to them and a promise to me. As I grew older, nothing changed in that house. Daniel went to a good university. My parents helped him with every step, every application, every decision. When it was my turn, they simply asked me what I planned to do and nodded when I told them. No more advice, no more involvement, no more excitement. I chose to study accounting because it felt practical, stable, and quiet, just like me. After graduation, I found a job in a small firm. I moved through life carefully, without making noise, without demanding attention. I visited my parents on weekends. We had polite conversations. They asked about my work with the same tone someone uses to ask about the weather. Meanwhile, they spoke about Daniel's plans with pride and energy. Grandma was the only one who treated me as if my life was equally meaningful. I visited her often. We drank tea, talked for hours, and laughed softly about small things. She never asked why my parents were the way they were. She simply loved me in a way that filled the empty spaces inside my chest. Then she passed away. The day of the wedding felt heavy. The house was filled with relatives whispering about assets, property, and expectations. My parents stood confidently beside Daniel, already discussing what he might inherit. They spoke as if everything was already decided, as if the future had been written in ink long before we arrived. No more one asked me what he thought. No more one ever did. We sat in a quiet office while the lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. I listened without much interest, assuming the house would go to Daniel. Perhaps some savings would be divided, and life would continue the same way it always had. Then the lawyer paused, cleared his throat, and sighed a sentence that changed everything. $5 million. along with all personal assets, are to be inherited by Grace. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. My mind refused to process the words. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the eye itself had stopped moving. My father blinked rapidly. My mother's mouth slowly opened. Daniel laughed, sinking. It was a joke. Kid one, he sighed. The lawyer repeated it, this time slower, clearer. I felt their eyes turn toward me. For the first time in my life, they really looked at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. And he felt something strange. Not happiness, not excitement. Something closer to disbelief, mixed with a quiet realization that Grandma had known something I never understood. That night, something even stranger happened. My parents were suddenly kind, unnaturally kind. My mother cooked my favorite meal without me asking. My father asked detailed questions about my job. Daniel offered to help me manage the money so I wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I should have felt happy. I should have felt loved. Instead, I felt uncomfortable because I could see the difference. And I knew the difference was not me. It was the number attached to my name. Later that evening, as he walked past the kitchen, he heard them talking in low voices. He stopped when he heard my father whisper, "We need to convince her to invest it with US. She's not fair. She'll listen." My mother replied, "She always wanted our approval. This will be easy." He stood there, frozen, listening to words that felt like they were breaking something inside me. In that moment, I understood a painful truth. They did not see me now. They saw an opportunity. They were not trying to love me. They were planning to use me. And for the first time in my life, instead of feeling hurt, I felt clear. Clear in a way I had never felt before. As if a fog that had covered my understanding for years had suddenly lifted. I walked back to my room quietly. I did not confront them. I did not cry. I simply sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, replaying their words again and again until they stopped hurting and started making sense. Something shifted in me that night. I stopped wanting their approval, and I started watching them carefully. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calmness inside me. It was not the kind of calm that comes from peace. It was the kind that comes after a realization so sharp that it cuts away confusion. I no longer felt like the overlooked daughter hoping to be noticed. I felt like an observer inside my own family, watching a performance unfold in front of me. At breakfast, my mother smiled at me in a way she never had before. She asked if I slept well. My father poured me tea without being asked. Daniel started talking about how complicated financial management could be and how lucky I was to have him to guide me. He smiled politely. He nodded at the right times. He played the role they expected me to play, because for the first time, he understood the advantage of being underestimated. They still believed he was the same quiet girl who wanted their approval. They believed he would be grateful for their sudden attention. They believed he would trust them, and he let them believe it. Inside, I was watching every word, every gesture, every glance they exchanged when they thought he was not looking. Their kindness had a purpose. Their concern had a direction, and that direction pointed straight to the inheritance. That week, Daniel started calling me often. He spoke with excitement about his business, a business he had barely heard about before. He told me about expansion plans, investment opportunities, future profits. He made it sound impressive, hopeful, full of promise. But he worked in accounting, and numbers do not lie. The way he explained things felt rehearsed. The confidence in his voice sounded forced. Something in his story did not add up. And for the first time, he did not ignore that feeling. He decided to verify, quietly, without telling anyone. He contacted a private investigator through a colleague at work. He did not ask for anything dramatic. He simply asked for a financial background check on Daniel's company, public records, debts, loans, legal notices, anything that could show me the real picture behind his polished words. While he waited for the report, he continued pretending. He asked Daniel questions about his business. He acted impressed. He even told him he was considering investing. He watched how his eyes lit up with relief every time he said that. My parents began treating me like a guest of honor in the house. They asked for my opinions. They included me in conversations. They laughed at my jokes. It was strange how easy it was for them to change. And even stranger how easy it was for me to see through it now. A few days later, the investigator sent me the report.
I opened the file late at night when everyone was asleep. I sat at my desk and read each page slowly, carefully. Feeling my heartbeat grow heavier with every line, Daniel's business was drowning in debt. Multiple. Loans, overdue payments, legal. Warnings from suppliers, threats of lawsuits, and the most painful part was not the debt itself, it was the timeline. These problems had existed for months. Maybe years, and my parents knew. There were records of payments made from their personal accounts to cover some of his losses. They'd been trying to keep his business afloat quietly. That is when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. They were not asking me to invest. They were planning to save Daniel using my inheritance without telling me, without asking me. They had already decided how my money would be used as if it belonged to them. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I expected to feel anger, but what I felt was something colder. Something steadier. Clarity. Grandma single quotes S words echoed in my mind again. One day they will regret not seeing your worth. I realized that this was the moment she had seen coming, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next evening at dinner, I said the sentence they had been waiting to hear. I've been thinking maybe I should invest in Daniel's business. The reaction was immediate. My mother's face brightened with relief. My father smiled proudly. Daniel looked like a man who had just been saved from drowning. They thanked me. They praised me. They called me thoughtful, generous, supportive. For the first time in my life, called me thoughtful, generous, supportive. They spoke about me with admiration, and I let them, because the trap only works when the other person feels safe. Over the next week, they became even more affectionate. They included me in plans. They asked about dates to meet lawyers. Daniel started preparing presentations and documents to show me how my investment would grow. Every night, I went back to my room and read the investigator's report again. Not because I needed to, but because it reminded me why I was doing this. I was not doing this out of revenge. I was doing this out of awakening. I needed them to understand that I was not invisible anymore, and the only way for them to see me clearly was for their plan to collapse in front of them. I contacted a lawyer on my own. I showed him the report. I explained everything calmly. He listened carefully and said, "You are very wise to verify before signing anything." We prepared documents, not to accuse, but to reveal. Then we scheduled a formal meeting at Daniel's request. He believed this meeting would secure his future. My parents believed this meeting would restore balance in the family. They thought this was the moment everything would be fixed. I knew this was the moment everything would be exposed. On the morning of the meeting, my mother hugged me before we left the house. She said, "I'm so proud of you, Grace." I smiled gently, because for the first time, I understood that her pride had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with what I had done as we drove to the lawyer's office. I looked out the window and felt an unexpected sense of peace, not nervousness, not fear. Just a quiet certainty that after today, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. And strangely, I was okay with that. The lawyer's office was quiet, bright, and painfully formal. The kind of place where important things are decided in calm voices and serious expressions. Daniel arrived with a thick folder under his arm and confidence written all over his face. My parents sat beside him like proud supporters, smiling in a way that suggested they believed this day would solve everything. I sat across from them with my own folder resting quietly on my lap. They did not know that my folder was heavier than Daniel's, even though it contained fewer pages, because mine held the truth. Daniel began speaking first. He opened his presentation and started explaining his business model with enthusiasm. He talked about projected growth, future expansion, market demand, and partnerships that sounded impressive. He spoke smoothly, confidently. As if he had rehearsed this speech many times, I listened carefully, nodding at the right moments. My parents watched him with pride. Occasionally, they glanced at me, waiting for my approval, as if I was already part of the solution. When he finished, he looked at me with hopeful eyes and said, "So, what do you think, Grace?" I smiled politely and turned to my lawyer. That was the moment the air in the room changed. My lawyer calmly placed my folder on the table and slid it toward Daniel. Before any investment discussion, he said, "We believe full financial transparency is necessary." Daniel's smile faded slightly. "Of course," he said. "I've shared everything." My lawyer opened the folder. Inside were printed records of Daniel's debts, overdue notices, legal warnings, and payment histories linking my parents' accounts to his failing business. Silence fell over the room like a curtain. Daniel's eyes moved across the pages. My father leaned forward. My mother's hand slowly covered her mouth. My lawyer spoke in a steady voice. "These documents show that Daniel's business has been operating at a loss for an extended period. There are significant liabilities that were not disclosed during this presentation. Additionally, there is evidence that the parents have been financially supporting these losses for months." No one spoke. No one could. Daniel looked at my parents, searching for help. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not pride. Something closer to fear, and I finally spoke. Calmly. Double quotes, "I know everything." Those 3 words felt heavier than all the documents combined. My mother started shaking her head. "Grace, this isn't what you think." I raised my hand gently. Not to stop her harshly, just enough to show I was no longer the girl who listened quietly. "I heard you that night in the kitchen," I said softly. "I heard the plan." Daniel's face went pale. My father's shoulders dropped. The confidence that had filled the room minutes earlier disappeared completely. I was never going to invest blindly. I continued. "I just needed you to believe I would." The room felt smaller. The walls felt closer. The truth was no longer something hidden in whispers. It was sitting openly on the table between us. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. "Grace, I was going to tell you." "When?" I asked gently. "After the papers were signed?" He had no answer. My father finally spoke, his voice low. "We were trying to protect the family." I looked at him and realized something important. He truly believed that. In his mind, using my inheritance to save Daniel was not betrayal. It was practicality. It was logic. It was favoritism dressed up as responsibility. "But I'm the family too," I said quietly. That sentence hung in the air longer than anything else, because for the first time, they had no way to deny it. I turned to my lawyer and said, "There will be no investment." Then I stood up. Not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly, like someone closing a book they had finished reading. As I walked toward the door, my mother called my name. "Grace, please." I stopped and looked back at them. I expected to feel rage. I expected tears. But what I felt was something far more powerful. I felt free. "You don't need to pretend anymore," I said softly. "I understand everything now." And I left. The drive home was silent. My parents sat in the front seats without speaking. Daniel stared out of the window, avoiding my reflection in the glass. No one tried to argue. No one tried to explain. Because explanations only work when the truth is unclear. And today, the truth was painfully obvious. That night, I packed my bags. Not in anger. Not in sadness, but with a calm certainty that I could no longer live in a place where I finally saw things clearly. My mother stood at my bedroom door while I packed. She watched me quietly, as if trying to understand who I had become. "Are you really leaving?" she asked. I folded my clothes slowly. "Yes. For how long?" I paused, then answered honestly, "I don't know." She wanted to say something else. I could see it in her eyes. But words failed her, because any sentence she tried to form would have to admit something she'd avoided her whole life, that she had never truly seen me. When my suitcase was closed, I walked past the living room. My father was sitting on the couch staring at nothing. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. I stopped at the door and looked back at the house. For years, I had wanted this house to feel like home, and now I felt nothing toward it. I stepped outside without saying goodbye, because sometimes silence is louder than any farewell. I did not cry when I left the house. I thought I would. I thought years of quiet hurt would pour out of me the moment I stepped away from that door. But nothing came. No tears, no anger. Just a deep, steady silence inside my chest. I drove for a long time without knowing exactly where I was going. The road ahead felt open in a way my life never had before. For the first time, I was not moving according to anyone else's expectations. I was not trying to earn approval. I was not trying to fit into a place that had never made space for me. I Checked into a small hotel near the coast that evening. The room smelled like salt air and fresh sheets. I stood by the window and watched the waves in the distance. The sound of the sea was constant, calm, and honest. It did not pretend. It did not hide anything. It simply existed. That night, I slept better than I had in years. In the morning, I called my lawyer and began the process of transferring the inheritance into secure accounts under my full control. I made it clear that no one else would have access, no share permissions, no signatures required but mine. It felt strange to speak with such certainty, but it also felt right. Then I did something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I started looking for a small house near the sea. Not a big mansion. Not something impressive. Just a quiet place where I could hear the waves at night and feel like I belonged to my own life. Over the next few days, I visited several properties. I walked through empty rooms imagining what it would feel like to live there without being watched, judged, or compared. I finally found a modest house with white walls, wooden floors, and a balcony that faced the water. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something warm in my chest. This felt like a beginning. I bought it without hesitation. While the paperwork was being processed, I also began planning what to do with the money in a way that honored the only person who had truly loved me without conditions. Grandma. She had always cared deeply about education, especially for girls who were overlooked, ignored, or told they were less important. I contacted a local foundation that supported girls' education and arranged a large donation in her name. As I signed the documents, I smiled for the first time since the will reading. Not because I felt victorious, but because I felt aligned with something meaningful. Something bigger than family politics, bigger than inheritance, bigger than resentment. I was finally using the money in a way that reflected who I was, not who they thought I should be. I moved into the house 2 weeks later. The first night there, I sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, listening to the waves. The air was cool and the sky was full of stars. I realized I had never felt this peaceful in my life. No one was calling my name from another room. No one was asking where I was. No one was expecting anything from me. For the first time, I existed without being measured. Days turned into a quiet routine. I continued my work remotely for a while, then slowly reduced my hours. I cooked for myself, walked along the shore in the evenings, and spent long hours reading or simply sitting with my thoughts. Sometimes, memories from my childhood would surface unexpectedly. Moments where I had stood in the background while Daniel was praised. Moments where I had wanted to speak but chose silence instead. And instead of feeling hurt, I felt something else. Understanding. I understood now that their behavior had shaped me into someone observant, patient, and strong in ways they never intended. They had overlooked me so much that I had learned to stand on my own without needing them, and that realization felt strangely empowering. About a month later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time. Before answering, her voice sounded softer than I remembered. "Grace, how are you?" "I'm fine," I replied calmly. She hesitated before speaking again. "We miss you." I did not know how to respond to that. Not because I was angry, but because I did not know what missing meant to someone who had never truly noticed my presence before. We spoke for a few minutes about simple things, weather, health, nothing important, nothing honest. Before hanging up, she said, "Your father has been very quiet lately." I knew what she meant without her saying it. The plan had failed. Daniel's business was still drowning. And now there was no inheritance to rescue it. A week later, Daniel called. He did not start with greetings. He went straight to the point. "Grace, things are getting bad. I might have to shut the business down." I listened quietly. He continued, "I know you don't owe me anything, but if you could just lend me a small amount to get through this." I interrupted gently. "Daniel, I hope things work out for you. Truly, but I can't help." There was a long silence on the line. Then he said something that surprised me. "You've changed." I looked out at the sea as I replied, "No, I've just stopped being invisible." He had no response to that. We ended the call politely. As I put the phone down, I noticed something important. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel angry. I felt neutral, and that neutrality felt like healing, because when you no longer carry anger or sadness towards someone, it means they no longer have power over you. That evening I sat on the balcony again and watched the sunset. The sky turned shades. of orange and pink, and the water reflected the colors beautifully. I thought about Grandma and how she had always believed in a future for me that I could not see at the time. Now I was living it. Not because of the money, but because of the clarity it had brought into my life. For the first time, I felt like I belonged to myself. Asterisk weeks turned into months, and life in my new house settled into a comforting rhythm. I woke up with the sun, brewed my own coffee, and walked along the shoreline as the waves lapped against my feet. Every step felt like a reclamation of myself, as if the years I spent being overlooked were slowly being returned to me, not stolen. Not borrowed, but finally mine. I had avoided my parents and Daniel completely, focusing on my work, my home, and the foundation I had set up for girls' education. Helping them felt like honoring Grandma's memory, something far more meaningful than giving in to old family expectations. Every letter I received from the foundation, every update about a girl completing school because of that support, felt more rewarding than anything Daniel's family could have offered me in gratitude. Then one afternoon, as I returned from the shore, I found a message on my phone. It was from my father. I debated whether to read it immediately. Curiosity battled caution, and finally I opened it. It was short, simple, almost childlike. Can we meet? We need to talk. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance I had so carefully cultivated. But another part, a quieter, wiser part, recognized the inevitable confrontation. They had finally realized that I had no intention of giving in, and they wanted to try to regain control, or at least understand what had changed. I agreed to meet, not out of obligation, but to observe, to watch how they would confront me without the buffer of the home they had always controlled. The cafe was quiet, tucked away from the main street, filled with soft light and the smell of brewed coffee. My parents arrived first, sitting stiffly across from each other, their hands twisting nervously. They looked at me like I had been a puzzle they could not solve. When I arrived, their eyes widened slightly. I was calm, collected, confident. They had expected to see the same Grace who had hesitated, who had sought their approval, who had been unsure and pliable. Instead, I was someone they didn't recognize, and that terrified them. My father spoke first. Grace, we didn't I didn't expect you to handle things this way. His voice faltered. We thought you'd help Daniel, that you'd understand. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I said gently, I understand perfectly. I understand your plan. I understand your priorities. I understand everything. Their faces fell. My mother reached out as if to touch my hand, but hesitated. Grace, we love you. You have to know that. I smiled softly, shaking my head. Love isn't what this was. You never needed me. You only needed my money to fix what you wanted fixed. And I won't be a part of that. Daniel's name was never mentioned. It didn't need to be. My parents understood that their golden child was sinking, and I had chosen to stay distant. They were watching me now, realizing the person they had ignored all those years had become unmovable, uncheckable, someone outside their influence. That night, I returned to my house, feeling lighter than ever. I realized something important. This is not revenge in the way most stories describe. I didn't need to destroy them. I didn't need to humiliate them. Their disappointment, their inability to manipulate me, their realization that I was no longer under their control, that was the power. Over the following months, I focused entirely on myself and my future. I invested carefully, not recklessly, building stability while still enjoying life. I traveled a little, explored small towns near the coast, and allowed myself pleasures I had long denied. Fresh pastries in quiet cafes, spontaneous drives down empty highways, evenings spent reading with the sun setting behind me. The foundation work became a part of my identity. I visited the schools I supported, met girls whose lives had changed because someone had believed in them, and I thought often about Grandma. Her presence was in every act of kindness, every life I touched. I realized that her gift to me wasn't the inheritance itself, it was the power to see clearly, to act wisely, and to live independently. Daniel's business collapsed completely. My parents tried to call me once, asking for guidance, for help, for intervention. I listened to their pleas, their polite but desperate words, and then I made my decision. I would not respond in anger. I would not respond in cruelty. I simply said, I hope things get better for you, and ended the call. No shouting. No drama, just calm. just certainty, and that calmness taught me something else. The greatest victory is not in confrontation or retaliation. It is in living so fully and confidently that the people who once overlooked you are powerless to influence your life. Watching from a distance, realizing they can no longer control your story, that is the kind of triumph that cannot be taken away. I began to rebuild my relationships, but only with those who saw me as an equal, not as a tool or an accessory to their ambitions. Friendships deepened, colleagues respected me, and for the first time, I felt fully visible not because someone else made me so, but because I stood firmly in my own worth. There were moments, quiet ones, where I remembered being small and visible, and ignored. And each time, I felt a flicker of sadness, not for myself, but for the people who never learned to see others beyond what they could gain from them. That sadness was brief. The peace I had now was stronger, brighter, and permanent. My life had become a steady rhythm of choice and freedom. I was no longer reacting to expectations or living for approval. I had become the grace I was meant to be: aware, observant, independent, and unshakable. And all it had taken was clarity, courage, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the best response to betrayal is not revenge, it is thriving. Asterisk. The months that followed were some of the most peaceful and empowering of my life. I woke up each morning to the sound of waves hitting the shore, a sound that reminded me I no longer lived in a house where my presence was optional. I had carved a life that was entirely my own, shaped by my choices, my desires, and my vision for the future. The freedom I had longed for all my life was no longer a dream, it was real, tangible, and mine to hold. I started to explore the world beyond the coast. Small trips, short vacations, places I had never allowed myself to imagine. Visiting when I was trying to fit into someone else's expectations. I walked streets lined with unfamiliar cafes, found hidden libraries filled with dusty books, and even took an impromptu art class, something I had always wanted to do but never dared because I thought it wasn't practical. Each experience reminded me that life had more to offer than silence and invisibility. Meanwhile, I poured energy into the foundation I'd established in Grandma's name. Every day, I received letters from girls whose lives had changed because of our support. One letter in particular stood out. A young girl named Sarah, who had been on the verge of dropping out of school, wrote about how the foundation's support gave her hope, how she could now imagine a future where her voice mattered. I read that letter late one night, tears welling up in my eyes, not out of sadness, but because I realized that I was part of something bigger than myself, something that my parents could never have controlled or bought. It was a reminder that real impact comes from care, attention, and belief, not inheritance or manipulation. Occasionally, my parents would call. Sometimes Daniel did too. They asked questions, tried to explain, even subtly tried to convince me to reconsider helping Daniel's failing business. But I remained firm. I had learned the power of boundaries. I had learned that saying no does not make you cruel, it makes you wise. And most importantly, I had learned that walking away from a toxic system does not mean you are weak. It means you are strong enough to survive without depending on people who never truly valued you. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at my house for a few close friends who had been there for me in small, unassuming ways. We laughed, shared stories, and I realized something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. Family is not always the people who share your last name. Family can be the people who see you, who appreciate you, and who celebrate your worth without conditions. For the first time in my life, I felt surrounded by love that was unconditional, authentic, and deeply reassuring. As the year went on, my life continued to flourish. I invested my inheritance wisely, not recklessly, building a foundation of financial security. I traveled more, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends who understood me. I spent quiet mornings reading on the balcony, afternoons writing letters to the foundation, and evenings walking along the shore, reflecting on how far I had come. Every wave, every sunset, every small moment reminded me that I had not just survived, I had thrived. I often thought back to that moment when the will was read, the moment when I realized my parents and brother had never truly seen me. I thought about the quiet girl I used to be, the one who stood in the background waiting to be noticed. And I smiled not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally become visible to myself. The power of living fully, independently, and confidently had shown me the most important truth. The greatest revenge is not destruction. It is the success, peace, and fulfillment that others cannot take away. No matter how hard they try, months later, I received one last call from Daniel. He was polite, hesitant, and nervous. I listened as he explained that his business had officially closed and that he had learned difficult lessons about honesty, planning, and responsibility. He apologized in a quiet, almost embarrassed voice. I simply replied, "I hope you take these lessons to heart," and hung up. I felt nothing but calm. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a sense of finality. I had lived my life while they had chosen theirs, and now the consequences of their choices were theirs to bear. I looked around my home one evening and realized something remarkable. For the first time in my life, I was proud of myself not for money, not for status, not for recognition, but for the person I had become. Strong, independent, compassionate, and wise enough to walk away when others failed to see my worth. Grandma's words echoed in my mind, "One day they'll regret not seeing your worth." She'd been right, but her wisdom was not about revenge yet. It was about clarity, self-respect, and living fully as the sun set over the horizon. Casting gold and pink hues across the water, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for Grandma, for the clarity she gave me. Gratitude for the hardships that had shaped. And me, gratitude for the life I now had, the one I had built with my own hands. And I knew that the story of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated had transformed into a story of triumph, resilience, and peace. So, to everyone watching this story, thank you for sharing in my journey. Remember this, being overlooked does not mean you are weak. Being underestimated does not mean you lack power. Your worth is never dependent on others' recognition. Stand tall, trust yourself, and build your own path. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes the most beautiful ones come when you least expect them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of betrayal, revenge, and triumph. Thank you for watching, and always remember, your story is yours too. Own, and your worth is never defined by anyone else.